Thanks, Brett. Good to see you. Let's bring in Joe Concha from The Hill now. Joe, this idea of the White House inquiring of reporters what's on their mind and maybe sort of what direction their questions are going in, how much of this do you think is nefarious and how much of this do you think is simply clickbait on the part of the Daily Beast?
Well, as you as a former chief White House correspondent, John, you know that this is the way things have always worked in terms of gaggles beforehand with the press secretary, basically a way to have an informal conversation around where these correspondents' heads are at in terms of topics. And you could say, OK, that's the way things have always worked through Republican and Democratic administrations. I think a lot of Americans sitting at home would say, well, why has it always worked that way? Shouldn't the press secretary be able to defend the policies and perspective of the White House without having to get a heads up first on topics? But the key question here, and it was a good conversation you had with Brett Baer earlier, is the White House getting topics in advance, John, or are they getting questions? Then I refer to the story. The headline literally says, quote, White House reporters, Biden team asked us for questions in advance. And if we're talking about that, and if 3 White House correspondents were angry enough to actually complain about that, then it appears we are talking about questions. And that's a lot like going to a job interview and going to the person a couple hours beforehand that you're interviewing with and saying, hey, can you share some of the questions that I'm going to be asked so I can have more accurate information for you when I sit down with you for this job? I have a feeling you're not getting that job. And the optics here, John, are horrible, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that there's a big difference between what issues or what information are you looking for today and what questions are you going to ask. Here's what the White House said in a statement, quote, our goal is to make the daily briefing as useful and informative as possible for both reporters and the public. Part of meeting that objective means regularly engaging with the reporters who will be in the briefing room to understand how the White House can be most helpful in getting them the information they need. That two-way conversation is an important part of keeping the American people updated about how government is serving them. Now, I was asked about this morning, and I put it this way. If the White House is looking to help reporters to fill out their stories and actually get information out there to benefit the public by asking what issues they might be interested in inquiring about is one thing. But if the White House is doing it so that they look smart on these issues and the press secretary is standing there saying, well, I don't have anything for you on that, let me go back to the well and see, that's a different item.
Yeah, and we've seen Jen Psaki time and again say she has to circle back on certain information. So it is interesting that one quote from this Daily Beast report, John, is, quote, the press can't really do its job in the briefing room if the White House is picking and choosing the questions they want. Again, questions. That's not really a free press at all, unquote. And this seems to be a pattern that goes back to the Biden campaign in terms of whenever Mr. Biden himself took questions, it came from a predetermined list of reporters that a staffer called on beforehand, and only the Peter Duceys of the world can get a question if they actually yelled them after the fact. Again, this is something that it seems to be a pattern, quite frankly, John.
You know, and I'm not running defense for the White House or anything on this, but, you know, this idea of picking and choosing seems to fall a little flat because Jen Psaki takes questions from everybody who's in that room, albeit it's a smaller group of people. But it is true, Joe, that especially during the campaign, they did specifically call on certain people during these Biden press avails, and they limited the number of people and who was able to ask questions. As you mentioned, Peter Ducey got questions in by yelling them at the president, who eventually seemed to enjoy the back and forth. But those are two different things. There's no question about that.
Yeah, and Ms. Psaki also, she was asked a couple of days ago, when will Joe Biden, when will President Biden have a full-blown press conference? So not 4 or 5 questions from the same reporters, but, you know, something in the East Room where you're talking about maybe dozens of questions, and she wouldn't even agree to a general time frame. And again, you kind of got a preview of this during the Obama administration. In 2009, President Obama, with a mostly friendly press, went 308 days without giving a solo press conference from his first to his second. So perhaps the Biden plan is to go down that same route here. And boy, wouldn't that be a shame not to hear from the leader of the free world a little bit more?
Potentially, yeah. But don't forget, Joe, that even a full-blown press conference, given COVID restrictions, wouldn't be a full-blown press conference. Great to see you today. We'll see you soon.
Good point.
Sandra?
All right,
Thank
John.
you,
Good
John.
to see you.